This is Privacy Notes, the podcast. Statistics say more than half of the world's population currently use a smartphone. This data from bitdefender.com suggests that up to 50% of everyone in our world today have personal information stored on their mobile devices. This could also be so because about half of the world's web traffic comes from smartphone users. This data is being collected and processed directly or indirectly by data controllers or administrators. To this end, there is a need to ensure the activities of data controllers or administrators are in accordance with a lawful purpose and consent by the data subject. Today on Privacy Notes, we will discuss about the do's and don'ts of data protection compliance. The conversation will focus on data protection audits and data protection impact assessments, as well as the processes involved in each activity.
Welcome back to Privacy Notes, the podcast brought to you by TaxTech Technologies Limited, TaxTech, in collaboration with the NDPR Academy. Remember that TaxTech is your plug for all things data protection compliance, cybersecurity, and software development services. The NDPR Academy is your plug for all things data protection compliance trainings and certifications. Today we are back with another interesting topic, which is good to go, the do's and don'ts of data protection compliance. Today we'll be talking about data protection compliance process with a focus on data protection audits, which is also called DPA, and the data protection impact assessments, that is a DPIA. But before we dive right into that, we'll review the data protection compliance requirements under the NDPR, that is the Nigeria Data Protection Regulation. We'll take a short break and we'll be right back.
And we are back. This is still Privacy Notes, the podcast brought to you by TaxTech and the NDPR Academy. So we're looking at the discussion today now, as we mentioned earlier on, is the do's and don'ts, right? The do's and don'ts of data protection compliance. Are you good to go, basically? So we're looking at about three aspects of the conversation today: compliance requirements under the NDPR, data protection audits, and data protection impact assessments. Of course, my name is Olugbenga. I still have Urenna here with me. So I want Urenna to just quickly discuss the NDPR compliance requirements. What are the compliance requirements for compliance under the NDPR right now?
Okay. Like we always say, we just touch the surface in this podcast, and if you really want to learn more, then you can obviously come to our classes. We have one coming up on September 18th. That's the foundation class. So all data controllers must have their data protection policies publicly available. Recall that we said a data controller is an organization or an individual who determines the purposes for and the manners in which personal data is supposed to be processed. So like we said, they must have their data protection policies publicly available. Although there's a deadline for that, which has already passed. I think, Benga, we already just touched on that. That's April 25th, 2019. So what will happen if, an organization, an individual didn't meet that deadline? What's going to happen in that instance?
Funny enough, the deadline was according to the Article 4.1, the NDPR. So basically, data controllers are expected to have their data protection policies, that is the privacy policies, publicly available on their websites or whatever medium and their office space, wherever, before April 25th of 2019. So at that point, I want to believe that when NITA instituted the NDPR, the assumption was that within 4 months, every organization, every data controller should have sufficient time to comply. So the 4-month deadline was given then, because the NDPR itself was instituted on January 25th.
Yeah.
So April 25th was about 4 months after then. And as of today, a lot of data controllers have complied, but of course there's still so many others who are yet to comply. If you recall, in one of our previous episodes of the podcast, we talked about the list that NITA released of the compliance organizations. The last check we had now shows that there are about 622, even though the estimated number of data controllers are in excess of 1.5 million.
That's true.
In Nigeria alone. So if at this time we still have just maybe a tiny, I don't even call it a fraction, a tiny, weeny percentage of the number who have complied right now. So I believe that it's definitely room. I mean, as more organizations and data controllers become more aware of the import of the NDPR, they will definitely begin to comply. And yes, there's some traction in that regard. Of course, it's not sufficient yet, but it's ongoing. It's work in progress, basically.
Okay. So I'll just move on to another point. Every data controller must designate one of its personnel as its DPO. DPO meaning data protection officer. Nothing about police here.
Yeah, exactly.
So, like we always say, if you want to appoint someone as a DPO, they must have knowledge of the data protection, vast knowledge on data protection regulation.
Correct.
I mean, Nigeria, and that's what we do basically at the NDPR. So your personnel in your organization can be trained and, follow the guidelines from the NDPR.
Funny enough, if you recall, on May 18th this year, May 18, 2020, NITA released a set of guidelines, for public institutions for the management of personal data, right? And in that guidelines, it was stated that public institutions were expected to have a data protection officer appointed on or before the 16th of August, 2020. I mean, 16th of August is about a month ago now, and the mandate was that within 90 days, that appointed data protection officer must have been sufficiently trained or versed in the NDPR.
That's true.
So right now, that means the deadline for that is between now and about November, if the deadline was August 16th. So by November 16th, it's actually expected that your DPO or your data protection officer should have been sufficiently versed in all the knowledge of the NDPR for him to function as your data protection officer. So that deadline is actually passed for those who have not appointed yet. But for those who have appointed, of course, they have the window of 90 days, which about 30 days have actually passed now since then. That means we have about 30 days gone already from that deadline. So as it is, like Urenna mentioned, we have our regular classes coming up. Incidentally, that's on Friday, the 18th of September, at least for the foundation class. So people can still enroll to get sufficiently trained in the NDPR through our NDPR Academy.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that, Binga. Also, all data controllers or administrators, including public institutions, like you said, must appoint, but this is in terms of the data protection compliance organization. That's a DPCO. So that means all public institutions must appoint a data protection compliance organization from the NIDA's list of licensed DPCOs so that they can ensure that they are compliant with the regulation of the NPR, the whole regulation as it is. So, I mean, as you know, we earlier said that TaxTech is a licensed data protection compliance organization. So why not reach out to us today? Also, I'll just touch on one last point. A data controller or administrator that processes the personal data of more than 1,000 data subjects within 6 months from January 25th, 2019, that's when the regulation came into play, must undergo and file through its DPCO, the Data Protection Compliance Organization, an initial data protection audit report. That's the initial DPA report with NIDA. I mean, and that's
the deadline for that.
That has also passed.
Has also passed again. But so that was an initial statutory audit report. But going forward now, it's expected that data controllers must file an annual statutory data protection audit report with NIDA, and the date for that actually is March 15th of every year. Although this year, due to the whole COVID-19 pandemic, it was extended for a couple of times. But by default, the date for that statutory annual data audit filing is actually March 15th of every year. So at the moment right now, a lot of organizations and data controllers have actually complied. But again, remember, like you mentioned, you can't do this on your own as a data controller. You need to appoint a DPCO, a NIDA licensed DPCO. So NIDA, as at the time that the NDPR was also passed, I mean, sometime around July 2019, appointed a lot of organizations, some number of organizations as data protection compliance organizations. These are the ones that act as middlemen between NIDA, which is that's the National Information Technology Development Agency, and the data controllers. Now, 2 weeks ago, basically, we talked about the data controller. Who is a data controller or a data administrator? We were able to put the
obligations of a data controller.
What they do, basically. What do they really do? You can listen to our previous podcast to catch more and get more information on that. So basically, you have to appoint a data protection compliance organization to help you with this initial. I mean, it's no longer initial right now though, because the deadline has since passed, but at least with the annual statutory data audit reports. So that's about that on that note there.
I'll just touch on one more point just before Binga goes on to his own session. You know that we have IDAP. I don't know if I've called it on this program before, IDAP. So, everything about us is technology driven. So
that's what TaxTech does basically.
We simplify all the processes as for software development services. So if you need to file, instead of going through manual processes and hours, trying to file reports, trying to get it to NIDA on time, trying to meet the strict deadlines and all of that, why not just do it in a simple
automated
process. Automated fashion.
As a background to that, basically, the idea behind IDAP basically means the Electronic Data Protection Audit Platform. All right, this was a solution developed by TaxTech to automate the entire data protection audit process. So ordinarily, from our experience at TaxTech, when we became a DPCO, we realized the first few clients we had or data controllers we had to file audits for, the timeline was pretty much, there were times we took as long as a month just to file one single data protection audit. And the reasons for this were because of the back and forth. You have to send this email, get this privacy policy checked, confirm this, confirm that, and it was taking so long. And we felt that if this is what you want to do, at that point, I think there were just about 27 DPCOs. And if you were thinking of reaching 1.5 million data controls, how long is this going to take? If you want to only file one organization or one data controller, you're taking as long as a month to file for them. So what we decided to do was, let's come up with a solution that actually automates the entire process and speeds things up. Right now with IDAP, within the 24-hour to 48-hour process, 48 hours is actually at the worst case scenario, you could actually carry out your entire data protection audit filing with IDAP seamlessly. And of course, as a data controller as well, you can also do your self-assessment on the platform as well. So reach out, like Urenna mentioned already, idap.ndpr.ng. That is www.idap.ndpr.ng, and you see how the IDAP platform works. So you can reach out to us, of course, through any of our communication channels. So we can put you through either you're a data protection compliance organization, so you can file on behalf of your clients, that is data controllers, or if you are even a data controller, that is, so you can conduct your self-assessment and appoint or select a DPCO to actually help you with the process of completing the filing and all that.
All right. Thank you for that. We'll take a short break and we'll be right back. And we are back. This is still Privacy Notes, the podcast brought to you by TaxTech and the NDPR Academy. So we're still talking about the data protection compliance process. What does it involve? The things that are supposed to be put in place. So, Minga, there seems to be a misconception, or let me just call it a confusion, about data protection audits and data protection impact assessments. They're different things, apparently, but
yes,
there seems to be some, like I said, misconception about it. So can you just, kind of tell us what the difference is, just so we know?
Okay, the two, yes, you're very correct. There seems to be a misconception most times. People tend to think they can use it interchangeably, but really they're actually two different processes. A data protection audit, for instance, now is basically a DPCO. We already explained what a DPCO is. That's a data protection compliance organization. So a DPA, or a data protection audit, is a DPCO's investigation or examination of, the records, the processes and procedures of a data controller or the data administrator, just to ensure, to verify that the data controller complies with the NDPR requirements. That's for a data protection audit. So it's a series of processes, and procedures that we highlighted earlier on. Whereas a DPIA, or a data protection impact assessment, is quite different. And this is basically a risk assessment, which is done to determine the possible implications of a certain personal data processing activity. For example, now maybe there are some activities you want to go into. There's some kind of data you come into, or you want to now begin to process. What are the things you intend to do with that data? So a DPIA basically checks that, okay, fine, this process, are they in line? What are the risks from processing this kind of data? For example, now let's say you decide to run a particular server that actually carries some very, very confidential or sensitive data of data subjects. You have to do a DPIA to determine that, okay, this data I am currently processing, what if something happens? What if there's a breach? What are the risks involved or associated with this processing of these data? So a DPIA is required to be conducted to identify every possible area where breaches may occur and the means by which the risk of those breaches may be mitigated. So it's basically you preparing basically for the eventualities, just in the event that they actually do occur. So that's the difference between a DPIA and a data protection audit. So according to the NDPR, you are expected to carry out a data protection audit. But a DPI is not mandatory. It's not mandated for all processing activities. There are only some restricted ones. So it's not every processing activity that actually requires a DPI, that requires a data protection impact assessment. So it depends on the sensitivity or how unique that data set is that actually determines if you want to conduct a DPIA or just restrict it to a data protection audit. Yeah, so that's basically in terms of a difference between both.
All right, thank you so much for that. Remember that we just touched the surface here, like we always say. And we have a training coming up on Friday, that is September 18th. That is for the foundation class. And we'll be talking about some of these things, as well as the practitioner class coming up on September 25th and 26th, when we go in depth into all of this we've just spoken about here, basically, on September 25th and 26th. That's a practitioner class. So can you just visit www.ndpracademy.ng to register for these classes, and also you can send us an email at info@ndpracademy.ng, and we'll be happy to respond to you on any questions you have regarding our data protection compliance trainings.
Thank you very much, Urenna. And also remember, our Africa Data Protection Conclave is just about a month away now. I'm sure you've been hearing news about this all over the place already. And this takes place on October 15th and 16th. So the Africa Data Protection Conclave is expected to bring in data professionals and practitioners and stakeholders from all across Africa. So it's not just a Nigerian thing, it cuts across the entire Africa. We actually have international correspondents also, international contributors and speakers coming in the course of this program. I mean, for the event itself, October 15th and 16th. Just visit our website on africadpconclave.com. You get more information on that, then how you can register to be a part of this conference. This is probably the biggest thing on data protection as far as the African continent is concerned. You don't want to miss this. You want to be a part of this. So definitely go visit our website, www.africadpconclave.com, and find more details. TaxTech and NDPR are also co-sponsors, along with a couple of other brands sponsoring the Africa Data Protection Conclave. We look forward to having you register and being a part of this event too.
Okay, so just the last point, remember that to have a seamless, effective and efficient statutory data protection audit process, visit IDAP. That is idap.ndpr.ng. All right, thank you.
All right then. Thank you very much. It's been a good one. We hope to see you in the next episode of this podcast. And also don't forget, before I go, also RDB, in case you experience any data breach, any data breaches of any kind, your personal data has been abused or breached in one way or the other, you could visit www.rdb.ng to file or report those data breaches, and we'll escalate this to the appropriate authorities. I hope you could take your time to listen all over again. It looks like a lot of information overload. Different websites have been called. You could come back and listen all over again. It's a podcast, definitely, so you have all the time to catch all the information you must have missed out on previously while you're listening. Or you can visit any of our websites. You can visit taxtech.com.ng to catch every other information you want to catch from here. Also, don't forget us to follow us on social media as well on
TaxTech NG on all our social media platforms. That's LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. And for NDPR Academy, that's NDPR Academy _ as well as
on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter as well.
All right, thank you.
On our next episode, we will look at liabilities, penalties, and remedies under the NDPR.